Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Eileen Collins. Eileen was the first woman pilot and commander of the space shuttle. She flew 4 times in space, visited the old Russian Space Station MIR, and the current International Space Station. Eileen commanded the flight that deployed the Chandra X-Ray Observatory, and prior to the astronaut program was an Air Force pilot. Eileen, welcome to the future of space.
Thank you. It's great to be talking with you today.
I'm always grateful for the time that my guests are giving me, and I can't wait to start with my usual 2 questions. For someone who's been to space and was an Air Force pilot and has had plenty of time to reflect on the experience, what would be for you 3 words that capture the essence of space?
So that is a great question, and I think back to an Air Force general that I had met back in the early 1990s. He came to the astronaut office at Johnson Space Center and said, "I want one or two of you to come back and work for me. I want somebody who's been there." That didn't make any sense to me at the time because I didn't think you needed to have been there to really understand space. But I have a different feeling about it now, that because I've been there, I think that changes the essence of how I think about space. I'm a big promoter of space tourism. I think that more and more people need to fly in space. It's got to get safer, it's got to get cheaper. We all know that. But it's better for the entire human race that more people have the opportunity to go there. So your question about the essence of space, I thought about that right away, having been there. So my first question, or my first, I would say, thought about a word, which is hard to have a word. But my first thought that I came up with was what would be a word, and that would be infinite. And I thought initially the word vast, V-A-S-T, because you think the vastness of space, how big it is. But then I went with infinite because, we really don't know. We really don't know. What's beyond the 14 billion light years or whatever that number happens to be that we can see. What is beyond there? And I think about that often because I think there's something else out there beyond what we can observe at this point. So I think about the word infinite because it to me it is something that is beyond at this point the comprehension of the human mind of it, what is beyond there. And we are taking incredibly baby steps right now, going to low Earth orbit with people, going to the moon and Mars with, now we have robotic missions that are going to the outer solar system. All of that is great. We need to keep doing it. We need to go farther. We need to go faster. We need to find a means of propulsion to get us there, the destination that we choose to go to get us there faster. This is a message I give to young people when I go out and talk. You could be the person that invents the next type of propulsion for traveling, initially for robotics, and then eventually people will follow. So I like the word infinite, but you can also use the word vast. And so another word that I come up with when I think about space is the unknown. How much we don't know about what is out there. There is a spectrum that we can see different wavelengths. As we all know, we can see the light. We have instruments that can see infrared, ultraviolet, radio, gamma rays, etc. And that's great. But is there more? I think there is more. And one of the things that's been happening in the news lately that makes me think about this almost on a daily basis is they call them UAPs, unknown aerial phenomena. They used to be called UFOs, but apparently the leadership doesn't want to call it UFOs because that has a alien little green man content to it. But they're UAPs. It's something that we know is out there. We can see them in visible light, but we don't know what they are. I personally don't think it's little green men that are hovering around our Navy aircraft carriers and hovering around our military bases. No, I think that there is a type of energy out there that we have not been able to see yet in maybe you could say a part of the spectrum, or maybe something else. Maybe there's another way that we can, quote, see what these things are. What type of energy are they? And is there something in the physical world that we have not found a way to observe and identify what it is? These Navy ships, let's say the carrier air group, there is a huge electromagnetic field, radio signals, I mean, you name it, going on around these ships, and all of these are interacting. So, is there some kind of a result from that interaction? So, the unknowns of the entire universe that we live in is something that I talk to young people about, especially in middle school and high school, because at that point, these students are thinking about what they want to do with their lives. And if they can get to the fascination of space and how much we don't know, and get their curiosity activated to the point where they choose math, science, engineering, not every young person is going into math, science, and engineering. We can also inspire those going into literature and art and history and psychology and all the other subjects that cross with the space, that cross somewhere with space exploration. But just getting them excited about the unknown in your generation is, could be one that discovers something that we, had no idea was out there. So I like to talk about what we don't know. And there's, I think, a certain amount of inspiration in that, especially for young people. And there's other words that I thought about when you asked me the question, words like dark, space is dark. But, I don't like that because that's not very inspirational. So I'm going to maybe toss that one out and think, when I hear the word space, what comes after it is exploration, space exploration. So I think that would be my third word, exploration, which kind of overlaps with, I mentioned the infinite and the unknown, but exploring, that's what you do when there's an unknown out there, basic human curiosity. And maybe you could also say the word curiosity. All of those, I think, define space, and they inspire the human spirit.
When you're talking about the unknown, some of the thoughts that were going into my mind, and often I use that analogy, that if you ask to someone without any knowledge to describe what is the most important on Earth, right? They would tell you, well, you have the water, you have the mountains, you have the tangible and what they see, not knowing that the most important thing on the planet is the invisible, the atmosphere, the air, the molecules that are just necessary for life. That is actually unseen unless you have the instruments and the knowledge to perceive it. And I personally believe that the nature on Earth is no different than the nature in the universe, right? Why would nature create something different on the planet when these dynamics are actually work exactly the same but at different scales in the universe? So when we look at space, we think of it as this emptiness, vast, with these remote molecules, right? The molecules of these planets, and we think of the dark, the what we don't see as empty space. My thought in that the conversation of unknown is that this emptiness is also filled with a lot of stuff that we just don't have the capacity to measure right now. But once we do, we will realize that the universe function on the same way that the planet and the elements work on here. Is you have these currents, you have this atmosphere, these airs, these that work in different ways. So that's what was going through the back of my mind, and when you were talking about the unknown, and so much I mean, I go back into the history of our species, and how like we've always found ourselves in these places where we determine the reality based on what we know, and then we dismiss or we push aside what we don't know. I've been spending a lot of time on the water recently, Northwest Passage, and these remote destinations, and I remember these old maps, ocean maps, and they were drawing monsters, left and right on the map, because they could not explain what they were seeing. So we're not, when we think of aliens, we're not too far off, because we're trying to characterize, or we're trying to put something that can encapsulate, these questions that we have that are bigger than us. But yeah, so do you want to add anything, or we?
I think what you're saying about in the vastness of space, that there's something out there, like, comparing it to the air. I remember when I was a very small child in school, and my science teacher told us, you might think there's nothing here in the air, but there is something. It's full of molecules going through oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, everything that's in the air. And I'm a kid going, what is she talking about? That can't be true. And of course, as I started getting older and studying science, and it's funny that I have a memory of that. And it applies to space also. What is out there. And the fact that I know there's always a maybe competition between money in the federal budget of the U.S., especially within NASA. Do we spend it on robotics or human exploration? And there really needs to be a balance of both, because I think when you send people there, yes, the robotic instruments are better at seeing these things, because they can see much more than the human eye can see. And we have to have that. And that has to be first. That has to go first. But people still have to follow. And I think that having people there, having astronauts, or you could even say making movies with space exploration and people in it, inspires the young people to want to learn. And the reason I want to mention this is I spent almost 4 years as an advisor to the National Space Council. And they asked me to chair the Education and Outreach Committee, which I found humorous because, I did teach for 3 years, but I'm not a professional teacher. But they wanted me to do that anyway. And but I have a lot of connections that I can call people, hey, can you come in, and like people like organizations that do research into education, as well as various universities, the Department of Education, etc. Hey, can you come in and brief my committee? And we were learning so much about what is happening in our schools, where these kids should normally be taught and inspired to go on and be discoverers and be explorers and be adventurers. But they're not, in many places, getting that inspiration. Now, some schools are. There's a lot of inequality in the school system. Some are getting great education, but the majority of our kids are getting left behind. And I'm getting older to the point that I'm thinking, who is going to take our place, our generation, and to get these youngsters really inspired. And it doesn't always take the smartest person. It takes somebody who's vastly interested, has a lot of curiosity, and even someone who has the ability to communicate with others and get them interested also. You can take an example of the course physics. Okay, we think of physics as the study of motion, the study of light, many other things, but such a small number of our high school students take physics, and many of the ones that do, the way it's taught, they lose interest. One example would be this one organization was going through a briefing. This was a couple of years ago, and it was the state of New Hampshire. They needed 9 physics teachers. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, and they got 4. And I said, what happened to the other 5 schools? Well, they just don't have physics. They're not teaching that in high school. I think that is an essential subject for really everyone to learn, because you not only learn problem solving, but you begin to understand the world around you. And most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, it develops the curiosity of these young people. And I want to mention another problem in our schools, and this is in the universities. The number of students that sign up in their freshman year for engineering is actually pretty decent. We have a good number of students that sign up, but the dropout rate is ridiculously high. So we did some research into this. Some colleges are doing very good. Arizona State University, Georgia Tech had programs to keep their students from dropping out of engineering, but many other schools just let them drop out. And I think this includes science also. Maybe not science as much, but I think more in the engineering, the people that are actually going to be building our future satellites, building the instruments, and understanding how we're going to be doing observations and exploring. We've got to have these people in the pipeline for the future. And another thing I want to say about that, the smartest people are not necessarily the only ones that you want. There's some people that take longer to learn, but when they get it through and through, but it takes them longer. Those are the ones that are leaving. They're not getting A's, they're not getting B's. Oh, I got a C in physics, for example. I got a C, and so they quit, and I'm going to go somewhere where I can get A's. And to me, that's a tragedy because we're losing creativity. Even if you may not be an A student in your basic engineering courses, you might be a really creative person. One of my favorite quotes goes way back, that I've remembered this for decades, and it was said by Albert Einstein. He once said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And I reflect on that. Knowledge is very important, right? And he knew that. But he said imagination is more important. And I agree with that. Because when you can imagine something, what's possible. And what a great world we would have if we had teachers and professors that wouldn't let their students drop out. Said, no, you're good, just stick it out. And what if we had young people that chose to be physics teachers? Maybe they're not the smartest person in the world. Well, your students aren't going to be the smartest, probably. You just need to be able to try to inspire them. Because I think the job of a teacher is not really imparting knowledge, but having the students leave the classroom with a huge desire to learn more. And I used to tell my students that in the few years that I taught math, they'd always say to me, ma'am, why do we need to know this? I'm never going to use this, calculus, right? Why do I need to know this? And I didn't have an answer for them initially, but I do now. After I thought about the question, the answer is it's about problem solving. And too many people run away from their problems. They're scared of their problems. They run away, maybe I'm going to go have a drink or play video games or hang out with my friends, which is okay to do those things, but you need to face every problem as a challenge. Like, oh yeah, there's a solution to this. I know I can do this. And I think that this is one of the things you learn in math and science. So I have gotten way off the subject, but this is, I want to get back to stick with the future of space. But I can't help but think the future is our kids. We have got to get them inspired. Oh, and one other thing to say about that is movies. You can say Hollywood, but it's not just Hollywood today. But movies, films, Netflix program, whatever, Amazon, Netflix programs. In movies, things like Star Wars that inspired me. Okay, that sounds really corny and crazy, but there's something about the inspiration that the average person gets from watching what the universe could be like when we go there. Maybe there's other people out there. Maybe there's, planets with life. I would like to know the answer to that. And then our young people that watch these movies, maybe they'll choose. Maybe they'll choose to be a pilot. Maybe they'll choose to be a physicist. We just don't want them to drop out. It really is a tragedy at the high dropout rate. And I really think the solution to getting the kids, not only to choose, but to stay in there lies with each school and university and each teacher. Many teachers and professors are like, hey, you're getting C's, we don't really want you. Go somewhere else. No, that's not the right answer. So I'll stop talking about it, but that is something that I'm very passionate about. And I really didn't know that until I began advising the National Space Council, and they have a very big mission of uh, making sure that we have a coordinated, correct strategy for exploring space.
The couple words that the word.
Sorry for the long.
No, 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 no. But that's what I I love about these conversations is that these are all wrapped into what space and in these new um, destinations represent, because it's not about the destination, it's about the human story, and we'll get back to that. It's about how do we process forward as a species, right? We look back into our past, and 100 years ago we thought the world was like this, and here we are today. They thought that the world was ending 100 years ago, we think the world is ending today. Like it's the challenges are always there, but the power that you have is how can you craft that dialogue, the narrative, that approach. And challenges apart, life is messy by design, right? The life is inherently built on tension and disruptions because it wants evolution. So it will never be perfect, it will never be balanced, but you have these highs and lows, and what you can do is give people the skills and teach them self-esteem and tell them that they have the capacity, right? Knowledge will be acquired, but what you need to develop as a younger age is that thirst for knowledge, that thirst of discovery, that believe that you can figure it out, the solution, even if you think that you can. But so the two words that were like everything that you were talking about for me kind of like almost be reduced to these two words, and one of it is that the physicality of life, right? There's a big difference between studying things, looking at things, coming up with theories about things, and or like even training in a simulated environment as a pilot. But then there's the physicality of what they represent, right? Going to space, we can talk about it, we can do all kinds of stuff, but until you find yourself over there, and in and the physicality also involves a certain vulnerability of your body experiences something that it hasn't experienced, and it has to process, and the emotions come in. We saw William Shatner coming down and having to really kind of process the experience, and here is someone who is trained on capturing the emotion of the moment and just being a conduit. So physicality. Before the beginning of the interview, we're talking about the total solar eclipse that's coming, well, the annular solar eclipse that's coming up, and the one next year. And I was sharing with you how, like, the difference between 99% and 100% is almost night and day, because one of them just like takes you so like hard, and just like looking around and see the world is falling apart. So the physicality. And then the other one is the reciprocity with our world, right? We don't exist separated from our world. Our body is basically this giant creature of senses that only exists because there's something to sense, there's something to see, there's something to smell. And unfortunately, I think that with the advancement of the modern way of thinking, we have separated ourselves from this environment. We are running parallel to it, and we're trying to study it, but we forget that reciprocity. So visiting these places or being immersed so that you can see these connections. When I take there's some debates right now about having Antarctica being closed off to tourism because, oh, it's the last of the remote places. And I'm like, absolutely no. You want actually to create the framework and the structure to do it properly, but you want to grab people and have it experience so that when they, that, the Jacques Cousteau said, people care about things that they love. And how do you love things is because you experience them. So, leaving space, the same thing, right? We don't want yes, right now it's accessible only for people to the high means, but planes was the same thing before. Any cars were the same thing. Any way of mobility has always had these arches of development, but you want to have more and more people experiencing these places so that they can develop the exposure and the knowledge and that physicality that we're talking, so that they can, that becomes that spark. And So physicality, the reciprocity, so that they can experience, and in the education, I think that for so long we've forgotten that aspect. We focus more on the knowledge, but then we don't develop the root of that inspiration, so that they can create that inspiration. Eileen, just the all I think all this, there's an underlying theme, and it also connected to the second question that I asked. The space, back in when you started in the space, there was a military story of space, there was a politics story of going to space, and then there was the science story and the technology of going to space. But I think that beyond that, there's a bigger story, and I would like to hear your thoughts about it. What would you, for you, is the human story of going to space?
So I could talk about the human side of space for hours and hours and hours, but I'm going to let me just start with a particular baseline, and then I'll talk about the human side of it. When I think of space today, I think of it as far as the practicality of what we're doing as people here on Earth. I think of it in three different ways. There's civil space, which is NASA, it's the international, it's countries, different space agencies. Civil space, which is about really exploring space and learning about the human body by going to space, learning about the planet Earth by going to space. Civil space exploring. Then there is commercial space, and that is those people that are going there with their companies, their businesses, because they want to make a profit. And that's going to have to happen if we're going to really get out there and explore space. We've got to have that apparatus in the ability to do it and the money behind it to make it happen. You're not going to get all the money from government agencies. It's just not going to be there. It's got to come through businesses and I want to say the commercial side or the private side. And then the third one is military space. And a lot of people, back off from that because they think Star Wars, back Ronald Reagan wanted to have this huge planetary defense system, which people thought, well, that could be used offensively and that's threatening. We don't want to do that. And we certainly don't want to take war to space. We have the Outer Space Treaty that, basically is trying to keep space for peaceful purposes. And I won't get into that other than the fact that almost every country on the planet has signed the Outer Space Treaty, which was 1967. It needs to be updated, but that's a different subject. But the bottom line is we want space to be peaceful. But military space right now is really about protection, being able to protect the assets here on the Earth and our commercial assets in space from being disrupted by a rogue country. And we are so tied to space right now. Our satellites, communication, navigation, you know that. I'm not going to go into it. But somebody could take the whole thing out. I mean, there are ways that could happen. I mean, it could possibly even happen naturally with a coronal mass ejection from the sun, whatever you want to call it. They happen, but they haven't. A really bad one hasn't hit Earth in the last 150 years. Thank you very much. But if one did, we need to have ways to protect. So I think military space is very important. Now, the United States has the Space Force, and that's their purpose, is to train people. And their mission is to equip and train the Space Force assets to be able to protect what we have. And it's mainly protecting civilians. So I think of it that way. So how does your question is essentially the human side of being in space. And I mentioned earlier, more people need to fly in space and have that experience. I absolutely, there's no word to describe how wonderful it was on my 4 missions. Now, I flew as a NASA astronaut, so I was a professional astronaut. It was my life choice. It is what I did with my career. But not everybody's going to be a professional career astronaut. There'll be people who fly 1 mission, and that'll be either all they can afford in their life. In the future, more people will be able to afford, but maybe just one time. In the more near future, in the distant future, people will be able to fly more. But the other thing about being a professional astronaut is we're very busy. There wasn't this, yay, I'm in space, let's go have a party. Absolutely not. It was like, here I am, it's time to get to work and do not make a mistake. And the whole time on all 4 of my missions, it was massively focused. Everything had to be done at a certain time. You're very focused to not make a mistake. You're always looking at the timeline. You're always talking to the ground, making sure that, everything is getting done. We had a very limited amount of time on the space shuttle. It's better today because we have the space station and they're not as tied to the timeline and getting things done on time. They have more time to think and maybe extend an experiment or pause a little bit, but we didn't really have that in the shuttle program. So if people ask me about the human side of space, I didn't really get it until maybe my second mission. My first mission was all about first getting myself adapted. So we live inside of our little human bodies. Maybe we'd like to not have the problems that the body gives us, aches and pains, limitations, but we got to work with what we have, at least for now. So when I first experienced microgravity in space, I mean the actual place, not in the airplane, but up in space, the fluid shift was very uncomfortable. My neck ring floated up, my checklist pages fanned out, tethers were floating, dust in the air, the sun came in the cabin, dust is floating around, and my face got very fat, my legs got very skinny, didn't like it, didn't want to eat. I had what we call stomach awareness. I would say that would happen to most people. I'm a pilot. I've been a pilot since I was 20 years old. I've never been sick in an airplane. And at least up until I did get sick in an airplane when I was old, but at that point in time, I had never been sick in an airplane. But now I'm feeling very bad. My first day in space. I ended up taking some medicine to help me be able to eat later. But there's that period of time. Some people have it not at all, and some people it takes a couple days to get over it. That's uncomfortable. That takes time away. That is not enjoyable. So for those people that want to fly in space and have the experience, one day is not going to do it. You're probably going to come back and say, that was terrible. I hated it. I don't ever want to go again. You've got to be up there longer than 2 days, because once the body equalizes and your body understands what's going on in its own way, it's amazing how it adapts. Now you can start having fun. You can do the flips. You can do all kinds of gymnastics that you could never do on Earth. I mean, on the space station, they had bars on the ceiling. You'd grab the bars, flip around. We had a great big cylinder. You had to run around it like a mouse or like a hamster in one of those hamster wheels. Throwing balls, they go straight. There's no arc. Like on Earth, you have to arc a ball. You just throw it straight. And you learn how to drink out of the side of a bottle. No straws. That if you have a straw, you need a clip on it. All those little things. It's like a whole new world. It's magical. It really is. It's like you're a kid learning how to live again. And then when you come back to Earth, you go, ooh, I don't like this gravity stuff. This is going to make me old. I came back from my first mission saying, why are my feet stuck to the ground? My feet are stuck to the ground. And I had only been up at that point 8 days. And after maybe 2 or 3 days, I felt like I was born to be here. This is like natural for the human body. I really felt like I was born to be there. Although we know that space is not good for the human body. We know from scientific studies that the heart gets weak, muscles get weak, bones get fragile. There's a lot of radiation up there. If you don't protect yourself, the radiation is going to degrade on the cellular level and potentially cause cancer later in life, especially if you're up there when there's a solar event that happens to hit your spacecraft. Nowadays, we can protect against the solar events. We know they're coming ahead of time. But so there's good and bad as far as the physical side of the human in space. And then maybe the mental or the emotional side. For me, it was always hurry, hurry, hurry. Don't make a mistake. Get this thing done. Now, when you're doing a rendezvous, you're doing it on a timeline. You can't really hurry through that, but you hurry in between the events. But towards the end of a mission, especially if you have a wave off day for weather. For us, there was nothing to do. Everything was packed away. And we'd have like, oh, weather wave off day, nothing to do. So we'd get out the laptop and we'd play music and we'd hang upside down, having a drink, looking out the window, just kind of enjoying it. I had maybe 1 or 2 days of that in my whole flight career, but they're the ones I remember the most. And the other thing you can do is put your head up against the window and stretch out your arms, like you're an angel flying over the planet, looking down. Oh, and the guys say, I'm a Greek god flying over the planet. But you look down at the Earth and you see that it's a water planet. It's blue and white. It's ocean, seas, clouds. But when you have daylight and a break in the clouds, you can see the continents. And I have always thought, oh, there's, maybe 7 billion people down there, whatever the number is. Back when I was flying in the 90s up to 2005, there's a lot of people down there that I'm seeing like all in this one view. Can't see them. They're too small, but they're there. And I would think every single person in that view below there has a problem or problems or issues in their life, or they're suffering for some reason. Everybody has, maybe health issues, relationship issues, maybe legal problems. And I'm looking down thinking, wow, there's a lot of humanity down there and a lot of people going through a lot of different things. And I thought about that. And then the other one is the history of what took place on planet Earth. And when you look down, especially on the Middle East and Europe, I think about the Middle East, all the biblical history that took place thousands of years ago. And then you look down, especially I like ancient Greece and ancient Rome, ancient Egypt. I'm fascinated by the history of those countries and thinking about how they were explorers. They went out on their ships on the Mediterranean Sea. Maybe they didn't know what they were going to find. Maybe they were going out for military purposes or going for trade. Maybe they want to trade, but I think essentially they were exploring. And I think about the exploratory attitude of humans and how, maybe we just evolved that way, that we are curious people and how we want to see what's over the rainbow, what's over the horizon. Oh, and one other thing about, and I'll finish up here, one other thing about looking at the Earth from space. You're going to laugh at this. The Earth is round. It is a sphere. And people need to stop telling me that the Earth is flat. I had a seventh grade girl tell me that the Earth was flat 6 months ago. And where did she get that from? I mean, by 7th grade that the Earth is a sphere and it rotates and it revolves around the sun and we live in a solar system, right? That's why I kind of go back to education. I'm not really sure that our kids are, I mean, there's a lot of bad ideas out there and incorrect ideas. But I told these young people, I went around the Earth, orbited once every 90 minutes. And every 45 minutes, you see a sunrise or a sunset because you're going in and out of the Earth's shadow. And I guarantee you 100% everything that I own in my life, I would bet that the Earth is round. And again, it's silly. But anyway, that would be, I think, I could go on and on, but the human side of spaceflight is the reason why space tourism will be hugely successful. I guarantee it. Maybe not in my lifetime. I'm not sure that I'd invest money for tomorrow, but I can tell you that in the long run, strategically, more and more people will want to go in space and have that experience.
I know it's hard for people to understand the scale of what it is to leave and go into space, because we look at the how alien it is and how against the human body it is. But I think the comfort is not to look forward, but to look backward from where we came from, right? Our history is an endless continuation of these places that we get ourselves to, and then we think it's impossible. And then 50 years, 100 years later, here we are, we take it for granted. But for me, and often when, we try to, we share how we can compare the ocean, the age of exploration, navigating the oceans as what space exploration is going to be. And people are like, no, you cannot compare water, which is our, earth, which is our element, to space. And I'm like, no, you cannot look into the past with the knowledge that you have today. You have to look into the past and what those challenges represented to them at that moment, right? They ventured on the ocean with no longitude, no knowledge of anything. They didn't know about scurvy. Hundreds of thousands of people died in the process because they were at the mercy of the elements. They were getting onto these wooden ships. Every single tree in Europe had been cut down because of warfare and naval, warfare, which pushed them to go beyond the risk because they needed new resources. But you have to look at what these challenges represented. Even when you start in your little village and you look beyond the mountain, you look at the mountain and you're like, oh my god, how am I going to go to get to that top? And then at one point you get to that top, you look back, it gives you a sense of perspective, and now you can go on. Space right now for us represents that new element of, this is so big, we don't know, but there's millions of people who wake up every single morning wanting to find these answers. And I would say that there's back in the age of exploration, of ocean exploration, there was a certain naivete of what you thought the world was, because there was a lot of beliefs that were not really on the rational side. But now we look at space with the understanding that we need to protect, we need to study. We have a drone and rovers on Mars that are collecting the information for us, and we're able to assess these new boundaries, without having to physically risk ourselves. Because again, we go back into the time. If you wanted to know the weather in Antarctica in the middle of the winter, the only way that you could do that is to physically go over there and collect the data, and then in the process almost die so many times that you need it several times. Now we can collect all this information so that by the time we do show up, we're not showing blinded. And everything that you were saying about what is the human story for you, like, in the back of my mind, it all came back to that third word that you were saying about space, is exploration, right? It's exploration is what we do. This is one of the reasons why we're one of the most successful, or the successful species on Earth, is because we have been able to create a human story on life's inherent dynamic of pushing, constantly going to places, right? If we look at evolution, we're not who we are today because magically things kind of just appeared. Is this continuation of life pushing the boundaries, trying to trials and errors of what works, what doesn't work, and went from single cell to multi cells, explosion on the Cambrian, and the Neanderthal, the Homo sapien, and here we are today. And that it's not a linear curve; it's just this constant up and down, jagged, and finally, and it continues, right? It really continues, and unfortunately, the reality of stress is part of that evolution, right? If a species is too comfortable, now it becomes more kind of content and will take things for granted. It's that desire to fix things, that little stress that forces you to find the solutions. And where we are today is nothing different than where Europe was 300-400 years ago, where the hygiene, the resources was totally at the brink of collapsing, which gave the incentive for people to find solution, but also the incentive for people to cross an ocean and to go and explore the Americas. Eileen, like, I want to be mindful of your time. I know that we're supposed to be spending an hour together, and I know that, like, even without a bottle of wine and sharing a glass of wine, we could carry the sun for an entire day. But we started with three words that for you capture the essence of space. We've been kind of immersed into the human story and what it is and what it represents. But I also want to end with, and my apologies if I forgot to send you that question, but what would be, with your career as a pilot, as an astronaut, as a teacher, now as a as a source of knowledge and wisdom, what would be Eileen's 3 words of wisdom?
There's so many. The first, I don't know if these would be the right answers, but let me just tell you what comes to my head. First of all, humility. Okay, humility is not about being weak. It's about there you can have confident humility where you are a strong person who has your own ideas, you know what you know, your own opinions, but you have to be able to listen. And I think a confident humility is a person who can listen to another person who has different ideas. Maybe they're out in left field somewhere and you like, hey, that's crazy. If you look them in the eye and say, I'm listening, I think that leads to wisdom. Listen, and you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to do anything. The jobs I've been in the past, and I learned this from the Columbia accident, that not everybody was listening. It was same thing was true in the Challenger accident. Not everybody was listening. I mean, maybe they heard, but nothing sunk in. They're like, yeah, whatever. Um, and in fact, I'd recommend for some of your listeners, read the lessons learned from the Challenger and the Columbia accident. And that is a path to wisdom. I think listening is the first that I would say. Um, that goes with humility. Okay. So I mentioned confident humility and, listening that can go along with, maybe that can be a separate word, but I think confident, I think humility is one word, confidence going along with that. I would say another one would be courage. So you can have an idea, but courage is, being able to take the first step. And I think back to how I wanted to be a pilot so bad. I was a teenager, wanted to fly airplanes, but I didn't know a single woman pilot. And really, I had read about women pilots like Amelia Earhart, Jackie Cochran, who started the Women Air Force Service Pilots. I read an entire book on her, and I wanted to be like them. But I didn't know any pilots in my own life that were women. And I think back, it took a lot of courage for me to pick up the phone and call the local fixed base operator and say, can you teach me how to fly? And I was 19 or 20 years old, and I was afraid that they were going to say, no, we don't teach women. I was really afraid of that. And I thought they would just kill my dream right there. But I wanted to fly so bad, I overcame that fear and I called them, and it was completely opposite. It was like, yeah, we'd love to teach you how to fly. Come on up. And, we have simulators, we have instructors, we have Cessna 150s and Cherokee 140s. And it was total, and all it took was that one phone call to overcome that fear. So I'd say courage. And maybe the last word, there's so many. This is connected to wisdom. I would say strength, and not really physical strength, although we all want to go to the gym and lift weights because I think that helps us be healthier overall. But I would say strength in the sense of not giving up. And there's so many times that you can, think back into your life and times that you did give up or that you didn't give up. And maybe that was the right thing to do, maybe it was the wrong thing to do. But when you are older, like me, and, maybe I'm not going to go back to college, maybe I will, but not likely. Think back to, decisions that you made, your choice of your major in college, what college you went to, maybe you decided not to go to college, and think back on decisions that you made throughout your life as examples. But I mentioned strength here. Once you have the courage to make a decision, have the strength to carry it through to the end, and you will gain wisdom along the way. And I have gained so much wisdom by doing things I didn't want to do, and but really having the strength to keep going. And I'm thinking of certain things like the major I chose. I was a math major. That was hard. I could have dropped out, but I didn't. I wasn't a straight A student. I just kept chugging through. And I'm also a parent, so I look at my kids. They wanted to. Oh, I don't want to do that, Mom. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to summer camp. Well, they didn't know I made them go, and they came back. They loved it. And I could think of all kinds of examples. Oh, I don't want to go to that birthday party. I go, well, you need to go because you were invited. And so we take them, and then, oh, that was really fun. And so I think really having, I say strength, but having the strength to, um, do things maybe that you don't want to do, and then once you start, carry it through to the end. Because I think you gain wisdom by getting out of your comfort zone and having really the power to plug through. If that makes sense. So that might have been a smoother answer if I had days to think about it ahead of time. But I think that I really like the concept of wisdom because it's different from being smart. It's more of a common sense experience kind of thing. And uh, I think back. So my dad was a big drinker. He was an alcoholic, and he used to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he always said to me, Eileen, say the Serenity Prayer, and it goes like this: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So I think I've got some of my answer came out of that prayer that my dad had hanging up on the wall that helped him get through his struggle with drinking. So that would be my answer.
Now, I think you're an expert in impromptu answers, because it is. I agree 100% with you. It's the courage to go and start, the strength to continue, and the humility to listen. That, for me, these three equal the wisdom, right? We talk about the humility to listen, and you were saying a little bit earlier, looking back on Earth, you realize you have 8 billion people on the planet, and you have 8 billion stories, 8 billion individuals that are waking up in the morning trying to do the best with the baggage, with the knowledge, with the support network that they have. I always say that not everybody is healthy, not everybody is successful, not everybody is rich, not everybody is privileged, but every single person on the planet suffers or has suffered. Suffering, the pain is the big equalizer of the world. And then I don't want to say it in a way that, like, pain should be elevated. It's not that. Is that we, all of us, and we could carry on about, it's part of the human story, and part of what we are is pain is part of our story. And if we can recognize that pain in each of us, so that creates the humility and the understanding. And that's one of the things that I've always, like, even in when I did my solo wilderness expeditions, every time I went to discover these places, my creative process was always to sit, be hosted, stay with the people who lived over there, sit at the table, share a meal with them, and hear their stories, listen to their story. And you realize that at the end of the day, we're all the same. It's all about, we want to be valued, we want to do something that matter, and we want to put food on the table, and we want to give our children a future. Then after that, it becomes complicated. But at the essence of it, this is who we are. So, as you said, the courage, the strength, and the humility, so that you can create that that perspective, that understanding of the world, that complexity, right? That complexity, the reciprocity of the world. So now, thank you. Listen. It's been it's been an amazing conversation, and I know we could go on forever,
Well,
but
Daniel, I can tell you're a really good listener. You really are. So that's why you're so good at this.
thank you. I love, like, it's. Listen, yes, I'm an artist, I'm a photographer, I'm a writer, but ultimately, like, really, my love in what I do is, and this is one of the reasons why I've always struggled with environmental movements, and a lot of the current narrative is, I'm in love with the human story. It is messy, but there's a beauty to it. And there's when you choose to look where you want to look, um, there's no other, like, nature. I spend enough time in nature. Nature is raw. It's unfair. There's no right or wrong. Either you survive or you don't, and it's rough and it's in your face. And if a volcano erupts, it doesn't care. There's an entire civilization, an entire species, and that's going to disappear. We have managed to take nature and give it a certain story, and then we move forward and we create these stories. You look at movies, we come out of the worst of places and we come out better. And obviously, when you're in it, it looks like it's the end of the world. But with hindsight, we look back, it's like, wow, we like Second World War, First World War, first heartbreak. When you have your first heartbreak and you go, it's like your heart feels so like destroyed, and you think that you will never be able to love again until 6 months later, a year later, and then now you've moved on, and you look back and you wonder, why is it that was it so hard for you to to move forward, or because it was hard to see ahead. And that's how I see where we are right now. We've been in a relationship with the planet, with the world, that worked for a while. Now it's not working anymore. We don't know exactly how to proceed forward. We're going to have to reassess, lose some of the things. But in 50 years, 75 years, we'll look back and go, oh my God, things were so simple, at that time. They didn't know what we know today. So, Eileen, thank you so very much for your time, your wisdom. Much appreciated, and I look forward that our path cross again, so that we can carry this conversation.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the opportunity.
Always.